Hi, I'm Bruce Rouse, and welcome to this webinar. With me is Paula Bernardino. Hi, Paula. How are you?
I'm good, Bruce. How are you?
I'm very good. So, Paula is a strategic communication management professional. That's an SCMP, and she's been specializing in corporate responsibility since 2014. She's got a really strong interest in assisting companies develop a culture of sustainability and to be able to effectively communicate what they're doing with their sustainability initiatives. Um, she's both a consultant and a lecturer, and she lectures in communications at McGill University and is an instructor at Ottawa University's Professional Development Institute. Paula's got a master's in communication management and is a certified CSR practitioner. So Paula, it's really lovely to have you on this call to be discussing communicating your social responsibility initiatives effectively. So thank you also for getting up early. It's 7 a.m. for you in Canada. It's 9 p.m. for me, so we're kind of, but it is the same day. So
Yes.
thank you for coming on. So, and just before we were talking about communications and COVID, and talking about how in some countries, perhaps like my country, some of the communication around vaccination has been quite poor. Canada seems to have done a good job. So if we can move on from that to talk about sustainability, what are some examples of some effective communications around sustainability, both good and bad, that you can think of?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, it's interesting because you want to communicate your sustainability efforts for many reasons. When it comes to best practices, it's really a question of consistency. Um, Making sure organizations have a plan on timely also. So depending on the resources, depending also on the actions, on the initiatives, it's something that the organizations have to think about. Like, do you want to have it quarterly, monthly? As long as it's consistent. um, you know if organizations are big enough, they have enough of an initiatives and strategies, even an annual report, it's something to consider eventually. But otherwise, if you're not putting out a report on your sustainability or CSR initiatives, make sure you have consistency when it comes to communicating those initiatives. So consistency is important. Transparency. I always say that communicating your sustainability, initiatives should be a reflection of what's working, what's going well, your accomplishments, but also a reflection of where else you can improve, what is not going so well. So it does not have to be negative. It's just really having an humble reflection on where else there should be efforts to focus on. And then also facts. It's really important to bring out those facts, those percentages showing the impact that the organization's actions are having. I also often will hear, so those are the important things. So the transparency, the consistency, and using those facts or even examples, testimonials, really important. And then just going back to, yes, bigger organizations will have those annual reports, but smaller organizations, often I will hear them say, well, we're too small, we don't have a strategy. Well, you do have some action. So even for smaller organizations, start off with, your messaging, making sure that you have your messages consistent. And then eventually you can move on to a smaller report. But it's really important to have that consistent messaging.
Yeah, I also like the way that you highlighted there that you can also admit where things perhaps aren't going that so well, and maybe what you're learning from that as well, because that actually adds a bit of credibility to your message, because there is a fair bit of cynicism, I believe, out there around about organizations saying one thing but then maybe not necessarily. So for example, if I could perhaps give an example, and it's an exaggerated example, but if I look at say a soft drink manufacturer talking about corporate social responsibility, I'm a little bit skeptical because they're producing a product that isn't that healthy, and there's a lot of packaging associated, and that wasteful packaging associated with their product, for example. I guess admitting that there are some weaknesses probably is, may help you on the credibility stakes a bit sometimes, particularly when those businesses that are in that difficult situation where they're making a product that, sure, there's good market demand for it, but it may not be that sustainable. But
and that's a really good example. Exactly. I would like to see then that company also address the packaging, be humble and say, okay, we do have the packaging, issue. This is what we have in mind. This is what we have, as plans to reduce it. Because of course, bring it down to zero might not be realistic, but at least address it. Like, how are you handling that particular issue that is part of your product? How are you also handling the issue of, some people might end up abusing the product, so it becomes unhealthy. So are you partnering with organizations? Are you doing any educational campaigns on that? So that's been the problem when you're saying cynicism, is when you're seeing only the positives in an article or in a report put out by the organization. Also address the other issues, of the whole package of your product or service.
Yeah. So I guess that's one of the challenges, overcoming that cynicism, and showing that, look, we are genuinely interested. It may not be easy for us, but we're genuinely interested in becoming more sustainable and in improving the responsible use of our products, for example. What are some of the other challenges that you've seen that are common challenges?
So it's interesting because of that cynicism, what I'm seeing is companies shying away from even talking about their CSR sustainability actions. We're going to be blasted, or we don't have enough resources. So, but think about the stakeholders. So, if your organization is big enough that you're hiring people, the employees or potential employees want to know about those initiatives that you have in place. The customers are looking for that kind of information. So, it's no longer about, well, we're too small, or we don't want to put it out there. Otherwise, the negatives are worse than the positives, because you have those stakeholders who want to see that information, and it's a way of reaching out and reaching them. So your customers, potential new customers, and your potential new employees, they do want to see that.
Yeah. And in many industries, including even many in the clean energy sector, it's almost impossible to be perfect when it comes to sustainability. So, for example, if we look at the renewable energy and batteries, lithium mining is pretty hard on the environment, but we probably need that product. So I kind of like that idea of trying to be honest, saying, well, it's not all good. There are some issues, but we believe in the balance. Maybe this is, in the balance of things, and this is how we're trying. In the balance of overall, we believe our product is great for long-term sustainability, and this is how we're trying to address those issues where there are challenges.
Yeah, and it's educating the consumer, because it has become a part of our lives, right? Everybody has a phone. Everybody, even if you want to go more greener and you want electric cars, well, those batteries, are part of that environmental impact. So it's educating consumers, so that your consumers are able to, have a balance of, okay, well, this is what I need. So then go towards those companies who are doing those products responsibly.
Yeah. I kind of like where this is going, because I actually see a lot of green businesses making this mistake as well, in that they overhype and they exaggerate the greenness of what they're doing. I don't know if you've come across that as well. And having been in the game for quite a long time, I'm a little bit dubious straight away. It's not that good, and there's always a bit of a downside. Do you see many companies working in sustainability or in clean energy or waste management making that same mistake of perhaps making it too good to be true?
You know what? And it's not just making it too good to be true, is because those companies are, it's a complex topic. The other best practice is to demystify those big complex terms so that everybody will understand, so the consumers, everybody will understand it. So I do find that sometimes those, companies, because it's so complex, because they get into all the details about producing those products. But not everybody, not everyday people will understand those big terms. So from a communications perspective, the best practice is do your storytelling, tell the story of that product, but in simpler words so that everybody can understand. So otherwise, it's going to sound a little bit like greenwashing if you're not able to explain those big, terms and process.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great point, because often, yes, there is complexity, but how do you convey that complexity in a way that keeps people's attention, but without dumbing it down too much so that they can understand the issues? And I guess that comes part to, maybe people being really engaged with your product, and so they're willing to invest that time to understand it properly.
And then use those people with their testimonials, and
Yeah.
then put that forward so that they'll reach out to people so that everything is well understood. Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of like your point there about facts and figures that you made earlier as well, because they are kind of convincing when you see a number. Somehow numbers seem to have extra persuasive value. I'm not quite sure why, but you have a number, and that seems to add a lot more credibility sometimes to a claim.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then to that also, it's another best practice is show progression. So if you've done an article 1 year or quarterly, show the progression, take it back. Okay, well, this is where we are now. So people are able to see the evolution or where things are going.
Yeah. That's great. So so what mistakes do you see being made over and over again is my next question.
Yeah. So expressions. So using the, especially staying in that jargon, using the jargon of sustainability to convey your messages so people don't understand what do you mean by it. Because again, I'll go back. It's if you want to get people involved, you need to explain it so that they understand what it means to them day to day. So that's the mistake that I see, is just keeping it at that complex level so people don't understand what it means, especially when there's like more of those greener environmental examples. So for example, telling someone, telling your consumer or telling your employee, well, we're going to implement this initiative because it's going to reduce our environmental footprint. Not everybody really understands what that means. So, use simpler words or examples so that people will understand that. So I think this, one example is getting stuck with that jargon. And then the other example is just focusing really on just the positives, because that just opens doors for other organizations to start scrutinizing and saying, well, you're saying this, but did you see this? Just going back to another topic that is very, timely when it comes to CSR is diversity and inclusion, for example. We're seeing, a lot of companies putting information out there saying, well, if we look at our executives or our headquarters, we have these goals, or, we've attained, gender equality. But then, like, you've just opened the door. Okay, what about the rest of the organization? Then people start looking at that.
Yes, yeah. That can be a huge challenge, and I think for many sustainability businesses, that whole issue of gender equality is a huge issue as well internally for them as well, because I'm an engineer, and I look at a lot of solar companies or whatever. They're all male, pretty well. Very few females in those companies. So that's a broader sort of sustainability issue, not going beyond the environment, but looking at this broader thing of, I guess more social sustainability as well. Yeah. So there was a point you made there regarding facts and figures. We were discussing facts and figures. What about, no, sorry, I wanted to go back to the point you made about making the message a bit simpler. So even your example there of people don't understand this term, what your environmental footprint is, or your carbon footprint. I heard a great example a while ago. You know how we use the word carbon emissions? It's very kind of corporate speak, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I heard another one called talking about your greenhouse gas pollution. I don't know if that's any clearer, but the word pollution kind of makes a bit more sense. You know, it's
Yeah.
yeah. So coming up with phrases like that, I guess, is a way of better communicating. But I was just reflecting, yes, once you're into an area, it's very easy to just get caught up in the jargon. You don't realize other people don't understand it. Yeah. So, you know, I'm a consultant, and I was recently given a request to quote, and it was full of all these terminologies, acronyms. And so even though it's in my area, I had to look up, what are they talking about? What does that acronym mean? I'm sure you've come across that overuse of acronyms.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know,
Yeah.
sometimes an acronym in one industry means something else in another industry. So that you've just even confused that people more.
That happened to me once. It was extremely embarrassing. I was talking about a thing called an EPC. So in my field, which is energy efficiency, that means an energy performance contract. So it means where you go and you do upgrades to a building or a facility, and you guarantee the savings. You guarantee that the energy efficiency works will save enough that you'll be able to pay back for the project within X number of years. But I was talking to some solar people, and for them, EPC means engineering, procurement, construction. And we literally had a meeting for, I think, about 2 hours, not realizing we were talking about different things. It was really embarrassing afterwards when I figured it out. Gosh, they didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't know what they were talking about, but
Exactly.
yeah. So um, when I wanted to come back to this greenwash, and we've kind of touched on that a bit more, but I don't know if you can go into that a little bit more about ensuring that the statements you make aren't greenwash, and those facts and figures that you're putting forward, how can you make them credible and believable?
That's a good point. So, you know, one thing is, like I was mentioning, the progression. If you're showing, you know, progression, you know, throughout quarters, monthly, or annually, that's one aspect. Testimonials from people who are using your products, who are aware of your products, and yeah, so it's just making sure you have that information, and you're sharing that information, so that, you know, people are able to see a progression and are able to see, well, you know, there are some numbers. And even if, you know, maybe your progression, it's not increasing as you were expecting, address that as well. So that's where, again, the transparency aspect comes in. Yeah. And then, but that too is, it's also like you need to explain those facts and figures and not just throw those numbers out there so people don't understand what it means.
Yeah. Coming back to making them meaningful. And often you'll see graphs and you're trying to figure out, what does this graph say? Because it's not labeled properly. Yeah.
So that's a good you know, example, because, and then you can think, well, do I need this graph, or maybe can I just put like a number in a sentence and build on that sentence instead of having those graphs, for sure.
And when you're talking about the audience for communications around CSR and ESG, who should you be targeting?
Excellent question, because even there's a lot of acronyms, you know. So for example, if you're talking to your investors, so of course you're using the ESG, you know, part. So environmental, social, governance. If you're doing reports, like you might be using the GRI standards, the SASB standards. Again, those are just big acronyms. But I would say another mistake that I would see is copy paste. You know, one size fits all, and that's not true. So if you're talking to your investors, already you're talking to people who know these acronyms, ESGs. They will be expecting a little bit more technical, maybe information. They want to see more of those figures, those facts, calculations. But then you have to lower it down. If you're talking to your consumers, you want to be able to reach out to them more way with storytelling. So maybe less with the big figures, the big calculations, and more, what's in it for them. That's what you have to remember when you're identifying your different audiences, is what's in it for them. Why should they care about your message? And this is how you're going to grab their attention. So consumers, they want to know, well, why should I be buying this product, or why should I go with this organization for this service, and how am I going to be contributing to the environment or to the society by choosing this product or service.
Very interesting. So Paula, I'm going to keep this quite short, but I've learned heaps from this discussion. How can people learn? Can people get in contact with you if they want to learn more? Perhaps you can offer some training to people directly. I'm not quite sure. If someone wanted to learn more, what would they have to do? Yeah. What would you advise? Yeah.
People can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Or on Twitter, and send me a note, and I'd be happy to do a bit of similar, like, short webinar, and adapt depending on the organization, the industry, the field, and give people some tips.
Sure. That'd be great, because you're clearly an expert in this area. And as we were discussing before, I think that perhaps this communication aspect is undervalued a bit. Is there a certain size organization where you think that this becomes really where it's not done well? Would you say, look, probably the large corporates are probably doing it reasonably well, would you say? Yeah. Is there a certain size organization which you think could really benefit from putting more attention into communicating?
I wouldn't say that they're not doing it well. I would just say that they're overseeing it, and it's not ignoring. It's just they feel, well, we don't have to, or we don't need to do it. And I would say the small organizations, startups, a lot of startups have a very big social or environmental DNA. So it's a matter of time. I would say up to 100 people in an organization. Those are the organizations that I feel they're doing so much good things, but they're not communicating it. And it's just often because at that size, they don't have a communications person or function.
Yeah.
So they don't have that person reminding them that, we should be communicating that. If you go higher, they might already start thinking about communicating that. But lower than that, it's just their structure. They don't think about communicating that, but they're already doing so much good things, and again, I'm coming back to the startups. A lot of them, it's part of their DNA, but they're just too busy with what they're doing to communicate it to the world. So I find those, and then other organizations that feel it's part of their DNA again. So they're in the healthcare center, field, or educational field, and they have this tendency of thinking, well, people know already what we do, or nonprofits, for example. People already know what we do, so we don't need to communicate it. And it would actually be beneficial for them to communicate, and not just that, because it could also, from an investment perspective, attract investors, but also attract partnerships with other organizations.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks, Paula. That's just been some brilliant gems of advice there. I'm gonna go and watch the recording a couple of times afterwards, I think, and for myself. It's been fantastic. So thanks once again. It's been lovely having this chat with you.
Well, thank you for the conversation. This has been great, Bruce.
Great.